button. All right, now we're back to
Oh,
doing.
now I gotta be careful. All right. No, it's very nice to have a schedule that's not so stressed. And like I said, when I came in, so interesting seeing all the people on the road going to work at 6:30 in the morning. Poor people have to go to work. Sorry for those who go to work. Still working, I'm sure. But it is pretty great. It's always fun also to try to figure out like, well, what we're gonna do to kick off the year. And it used to be that Tim and Sal would write and say, you have some kind of a theme, so we kind of push that out to the group, and then I'd be like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, you know. And this year, I don't think you guys even asked me. I think you're just like, he's never gonna tell us what he doesn't know. So interesting. So I'm calling this little 4-week series, and now, then, and back again. Then we're gonna start with a situation that's what I see going on right now that I think is a good thing to address and chat about. And then we'll be going back to the past a little bit. Sandy, you'll like that, because you always like a little historical journey back. So that'll be the then, and then work our way back again to the current problem or issue, and maybe this will avail itself as we go, but maybe some ideas about what be some threads of what we should do moving ahead in terms of Christian faith and belief and demographics and youth and all different kinds of things that are interesting to talk about. Now, the now part of this, it kind of became present to me not long ago because of a conversation I had with former parishioner of mine back years ago when I was on staff at Presbyterian Church, Colorado Springs. My wife and I started a young couples class, it was young marrieds, and a couple years ago we were back in Colorado Springs, and our class had a reunion gathering. It was we always had a Monday night football party every week back then. So we had a Monday night football party again. It was very fun to see something we've not seen in decades. And one couple, not young anymore, but much younger than us back then in the late 80s. But a gal named Trish. So Trish comes up to me, pulls me aside. No, stay with us for a minute. I'll make sure I'll let you know. So Trish says, pulls me aside and says, I know we don't have time to talk right now because there's too many people here. I'm trying to catch up. But I have to ask you if we can talk sometime soon. And she says, but my first question was, do you know Pete Enns? Now, I know we've talked about Pete before because you guys have never really get Pete to come, I think. We tried, but he's too busy here too. I don't know what it is. Pete's got a lot on the table. We know Pete well, right, from working with him. And I said, well, he's in my department. I mean, he's not like my best friend. I know him pretty well. I, read a number of his books. And she said, because she says, Pete Enns has really been instrumental in Mark, her husband, in her, she says, I was trying to figure out what we really believe, where we're at, how do we work our way through some crises. And then all of a sudden it crossed my mind one day, wait a minute, he teaches at the same school Darrell does. So there must be some connection as we're talking about. So that was a couple of years ago. Well, then we talked once since then. And then all of a sudden, a month ago, I get this text from her, a couple texts actually. So you go to this one now, well, and here's what she sent me. She's like, hi Darrell, Trish here. Can I make an appointment with you to talk over some interesting thoughts? Feeling a bit lonely out here on the island of misfit Christians. Laugh out loud. I'll send you a few questions and issues we're grappling with as they come to mind between now and when we talk. One, we've primarily been taught that you don't fit the Bible into your experience, you fit your experience into the Bible. The Bible has an answer to anything you might go through. Well, maybe, maybe not. Wrestling with that one big time. So interesting to me that what she and Mark have been trying to figure out is what to do with deep questions they have about the faith. Where do you go with these things? And she found that not just Pete, but some podcasts. Now, I don't know, are you guys podcast listeners? Mm-hmm. Because I'm not much of a podcast guy, but I'm becoming aware that there's something like 7 million podcasts out there that are apparently pretty good. My kids are listening to podcasts, and I'm getting podcasts shared. And Trish had mentioned several podcasts. She says, if you want to know where we're at, listen to a couple of these podcasts, right? So one of them was, from, this thing, we'll go to the next one here, Frank, it was from the Roy's report. So Julie Roy's, investigative journalist, used to work for Moody, Radio, and then did an investigative thing about Moody Bible. They ended up creating some leadership questions that, you know, 3 major leaders at Moody Bible Institute left over what she was doing, and of course, her relationship with Moody kind of soured, because she was calling, you know, blowing the whistle on some things, and she started this podcast, and so I listened to, you know, I also don't know where people have time to put all these podcasts together, but it must be episode 200 or something, and but the one that she recommended to me was this one on the deconstruction, a problem or prophetic voice, from December with Scott McKnight, and some of you know Scott McKnight's name, a good author, actually a seminary professor, mainly at North Park, Chicago, and then eventually at Northern Baptist in Illinois. And now the last couple of years he left because of issues with the seminary leadership that bothered him, and he's kind of on his own now. But he's written a number of books that one in particular called Blue Parakeet that got sold quite a bit a few years ago on some things, on some basic Christian issues. And I believe we had him at Eastern one time. Joe Monica brought him over. I'm sure Joe knows Scott well. So very seasoned voice. And by the way, I listened to the podcast. I was amazed when he mentions that one of the big influences of his life was Ron Sider. And you guys know Ron Sider, that name, I'm sure, right? So long time, you know really well. You're a real colleague of Ron's. And I also was influenced by Ron in the 70s with his great Rich Christian's book. That was the talk of seminary in the late 70s when I was a student, to look at the ethics of stewardship. It was an amazing book, just rocked the whole Christian world in a great way. But anyway, that's Scott McKnight. So on this this podcast talking about the issue of deconstruction. So I don't know if you're familiar with this term so much, but if you guys come across this one a little bit, it might be something your pastor's even addressed or you heard in the sermon, deconstructing your faith. And it's got some kind of positive and negative things to it. Let's go to the next one here, Frank, see what we got. So Trish also said, and then also there's this Unhurried Living podcast. So here again, I don't know who these people are, but I listened to one of their episodes on this deconstruction versus disorientation. And nice couple, great, married couple, but actually a pastor and a counselor, basically, addressing lots of different issues. And I thought it was really interesting. I learned a lot, and kept thinking about these issues about deconstruction, because what Trish and Mark are going through is, they would call it deconstruction, but in their church context, this is such a negative that they can't talk about it. Thus, texting Darrell from 30 years ago, who lives in the East Coast, to say, can we talk? We don't know what to do, because we're kind of stuck. And I think they're certainly not alone in this. And this idea of what deconstruction is a really interesting thing to kind of work through. So this is our now situation to be talking about. What about faith should be deconstructed of anything? What does that mean? So we're going to explore that a little bit. Next slide here, Frank.
So what would be just a brief 1 or 2 line definition of deconstruction?
Well, we'll get to this. We'll get, yeah. So Walter Brueggemann, and some of you know that name. He's a theologian who died in June. Longtime influencer. I was amazed. I don't think I ever read a Walter Brueggemann book myself, or had one in seminary or anything. But I was amazed on Facebook when his death was announced, how many people on different sides of theological issues all paid tribute to what he had brought to the table for them in discussion. Clearly a guy who really had a lot of influence in many different ways. Another one of these great scholars, speakers, because sometimes scholars aren't such good speakers, right? So sometimes he did a lot of church speaking. Brueggemann, they mentioned in that Unhurried Living podcast. Yeah, let's go to this next one here again. And one of his books, he did a lot of work on the Psalms. Our Heart's Weight was one of his books. Worshiping through praise and lament in the Psalms. Go ahead again, Frank. So in this book, he's comparing Psalm 177, and I found that, like on YouTube, there's quite a few things where he was speaking about these two Psalms. Psalm 1, of course, we all know well, right? It's the great. I mean, it's such a great psalm, right? Planted by streams, by the river, we're trees blossoming. We prosper. We bear fruit. You know, this is what he called the orientation psalm. It's a great way to start the Psalms. And then, but then he says 77 was in his mind one of the great examples of the opposite issue of human experience. When it's not Psalm 1 of orientation, when everything makes sense. And of course, this is part of what's so interesting about the Psalms, right? That is when we read that we're stunned often at how stark the humanity is of what's being said. And it's always been interesting to me that a lot of these difficult Psalms and these things where the expressions of the psalmist is kind of overwhelming. It's always been kind of neat that they're in the Psalter. You know, they weren't removed to clean it up. It's all one of the things about the Bible that's always impressed me so much is that these difficult things in the Bible have always been there because they're in the Bible, they're scripture, so they've been kept in there. And Psalms are typical of this. So in Psalm 77, he says this is a disorientation, what do you do when you're in this kind of a spot? 77 starts out this way. We can go to the next one here, Frank. I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered to God and I groaned. I meditated and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. This line, I remembered to God and I groaned. You know, what a statement. You know, and Brueggemann says this is disorientation. This is what a lot of life is. And this is where my friend Trish and her husband Mark are finding themselves in this disoriented state. What to do about when they feel like Psalm 77 and not Psalm 1. And I think they're in the context of a church these days that's not allowing them the place to be able to talk about their disorientation. And they're trying to figure out their faith. And so this deconstruction thing, we're still getting to this here, Tim, on the defining. So yeah, let's go one more here, Frank. This word deconstruction, you know, interesting hearing about the oil tank. You know, no one wants to spend church money, budget. I mean, that's a big cost. I mean, churches are used to like, we gotta replace the roof. Oh man, you know, it's gotta be done, and it's a lot of money. Sometimes churches have endowment funds, right? That carry them through things like that. But what do you have to do? You gotta take the oil tank out, right? It'd be nice to just say, we don't need to, we just pave over it. But you can't do that, right? It's gotta be done. You were involved with this, you obviously as well. And sometimes those things have to be done, but the goal.
Nothing to show for it, you know?
You got nothing to show for it.
At least on the roof, you can look at the roof. But
yeah, and that's how a lot of home remodeling is too, right? Like we all love when we get to redo a room, redo the kitchen or bathroom, and it's all new and fresh. Sometimes you gotta replace wiring or plumbing that no one sees.
Fireplace glue.
Fireplace glue, yes, yeah. Things are critical and they're very important, right? And so sometimes you gotta take some things apart, you know, and deconstruct. Different than demolition. Now, I don't know if you guys like watching these home remodel shows. My wife and I do. We like watching a number of those, partly because sometimes we get ideas. Sometimes it's more fun than actually doing the work ourselves in our own house, which is hard work, and we've done that in the past and doing less now. But some interesting shows. There's one called Help, I Wrecked My House. You ever seen that one? And it's pretty great. And what happens is these couples, it's almost always these couples with family who decide to take on some projects and they can't quite figure out how to finish it. And so they move into another room. And by the time they're done, they've got like half a dozen rooms in their house completely torn apart, unusable. And this gal who's the show host, her job is she comes in and, you know, works with them, and then they get out of there while she and her crew fix this thing up and get it back to livable condition. It's really a pretty entertaining show. Makes my wife and I feel very good about our home remodeling things. So I'm like, we're not as dumb as those people. You know, we didn't do anything that bad. So we like the show. But the goal is always then to rebuild it, which is what deconstruction in terms of faith is about, is not just trying to tear things apart. And you know, we all get a little nervous about deconstruction. Same thing with home stuff, right? Like you run a sledgehammer through a wall and see what's behind the wall, and there's no going back. You've started some deconstruction. But sometimes you gotta do those kinds of things. They can be good. But when it comes to our faith, it's kind of scary. Because deconstruction means, well, what are you gonna find behind the walls? What do you have to deal with? And that's sometimes not always all that pleasant and a little scary where that might go ahead. All right, Frank, let's go ahead again here. Is it a bad thing? Still get that a definition here, a little more of a definition, Tim. Deconstruction is a bad thing. In a lot of churches, I think, see, my friend Trish, in the church they don't go to the church that I work at anymore. Like it, 30 years, almost everybody in our old Sunday school class goes to different places or live in different cities. But a few of them still go to the same church decades later. But Trish and Mark went on to some good churches they went to, but they're in a church where they can't talk about questions they have about their faith. Because deconstruction in their church is seen as a very negative idea. When you start challenging these things, you're on thin ice. And so she writes me because she doesn't know what else to think about what to do. And so we've had some really interesting back and forth and a couple phone calls about some of these things, trying to figure out what do you do with this whole idea of deconstruction. So
Deconstruction is different than just doubt.
different, but part of the same process, yeah. Because I think with deconstruction is practical.
You're looking for why you doubt.
Yeah, you're actually doing something. I think the problem with, like, we all doubt, and the older I get, in some ways I doubt more. Which I never thought. I thought I'd be less doubting as I got old. In some ways I doubt more things. Partly because I have more evidence about things to go, what do I really think about this? Like so for example, something about like approach to scripture and inerrancy and interpretation, inspiration. When I was young in seminary, those were confusing things, and that's what seminary was doing. You got to figure these things out. It's great for doing that. But then all this years of being in ministry and working and teaching and you got things figured out. I get a little, 70s. Now I'm starting to figure out, like, well, now I got a chance to weigh evidence on things. I'm not just doubting. So doubting is obviously good and necessary, but deconstruction is actually doing something with the doubt. But if you're expressing that to someone else, that can be very challenging. And when you express doubts or questions about faith things, and your response in your church context is a wall, it's very disarming, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, I guess I can't bring that up. I stepped over a line, and I have to be careful because we're all afraid of where that leads. And we all have family members, and we'll talk about family here in a little bit. We all struggle a little bit with, like, where are our children or people in our church who are our church family, where are they on some of these issues? Are they Trish and Mark trying to figure out things and they can't bring it up? Why is that? So deconstruction, really trying to take parts of your faith and examine them more closely. So yeah, it's doubt. It's just looking at things, but to go, what do I really think about this and that? And I know that in my lifetime of different, Baptist background, dispensationalism, so I mean, what that's all about. That's a whole interesting theology background that I came out of. My wife came out of Pentecostal. It has a lot of more overlaps than you think with my Baptist background. Presbyterian church for a number of years, so Episcopalian years. Now, we go to a Chinese church now for a few years. It's evangelical Chinese for most of the community. All these different things, but all that time has been a time for me to try and go, what do I really think about some of these things? And it's been interesting to try and take in my own faith, try and pull some things apart to go, what do I have to believe? What do I need to believe differently? These are scary things, and yet they're good things to do. Here's from a more of a progressive website. I saw this thing. This guy's asking a good question. Is it a loss of faith? Oh, one more here then. Is it a loss of faith or a way of growing in faith? Deconstruction is critically engaging long-held beliefs. It could lead to reaffirming beliefs, rejecting them, or seeing them in a new light. Under this definition, deconstruction does not necessarily lead out the door in Christianity, though it could. it could also be a healthy relearning of the Christian faith that produces a strengthened commitment. Now,
This is a good point, since you brought up Brueggemann. I read his book called Praying the Psalms. And he talks about how the Psalms, have orientation and disorientation, like you mentioned, but he also said that they also, there are Psalms of reorientation. And so I think the disorientation, there are a number of songs that talk about I'm down in the pit. The pit is the word that is kind of like the bottom, the worst, when you're really at your worst end and things are going against you. But there are songs, especially as you go through like the Psalms of Ascent, where you're reorienting yourself. And I think that's what Carr is saying here, is that you go through deconstruction, you might come out of it reoriented and hopefully reoriented more in your faith,
right,
than discouraged and abandoning your faith. But Brueggemann is saying that the Psalms are basically promoting reorientation towards God.
yeah. So there's a swinging back. And like you said, hopefully that it does swing back, but it doesn't for everybody.
Right.
And it's a little disconcerting when it's our own thinking. Like there's some fundamental things from my background that I struggle with now. And I have two older brothers who are retired pastors. And we don't talk theology much anymore, but we used to once in a while. And a lot of things that are kind of assumptions in my background, I don't assume anymore about my own thinking. But I'm not really sure I want to talk to my brothers about it, create friction. So eventually though, as I'm working through those, there's a reorientation, and there's ways you get back to reorientation. One of them is you show up on Thursday morning to engage in ideas with other people, right? To try and figure out, you're not just sitting in church, letting your mind wander on doubts. You're give and taking with other people to go like, what do you guys think about this? Yeah.
Another illustration of that that's happening or starting to happen again here is the formation of the 8th grade confirmation class. And my understanding and my experience at confirmation was, I hadn't thought of it as taking it part of deconstructing, but what have I learned about Christianity and what makes sense to me now, and what is my faith that I confirm, not the faith of my parents when I was baptized as an infant, or faith of the congregation. What do I believe? And that's this whole process.
Yeah. It's an interesting name, even confirmation, right? You're confirming your faith. We don't call it questioning class, though. Historically, churches that do confirmation, often it deconfirms when kids go through confirmation. Because I watched this for many years in many places where sometimes parents say, look, just get through the confirmation class and you can do whatever you want. And the kid says, okay, I decided after I finish that, I don't want to do this. So they don't confirm, right? So it actually sort of works backwards sometimes. But that might be because in some contexts, and I would be surprised if this was true with Wayne, you couldn't ask questions in the confirmation class, but churches sometimes, we don't want anybody, we don't want certainly teenagers deconstructing already. It's like, what do you know yet? You don't know anything yet. Just, like my mother-in-law would apparently say to my wife when she was growing up, my wife would question something. She says her mom would often sing a little song. It was, believe it because it's true. So the principle was, don't ask the questions, just believe it because it's true. In fact, she always said, believe it because it is true. I know the song, I never heard my mother-in-law sing it, but I heard my wife sing those lines because she heard them so many times in her life. And that's kind of what we do in church often. You go, well, you just fucking believe it. You can rely on it. But sometimes, when you're a kid, even in confirmation class, I was never that kid thinking through everything, but I even as not the brilliant, smart kid in the group, I still had questions about things our church was doing or didn't do that. It's like, what what's with that, right? But if you can't address those things in that context, what are you gonna do? You're gonna eventually disorient and never reorient, right? You're gonna be done, and we all know people like that. Families, friends who left. I can think of a lot of people from my background. I'm so close with a lot of guys I grew up with in my church. There's also a lot of guys we never saw again. They're done. You know, so whatever they disoriented, they didn't reorient. It didn't come back to them. Whereas for the rest of us, it came back in some way. Now on that podcast, next one here, Frank, that was McKnight. It's a few interesting thing McKnight said in this podcast on the Roy's report, talking about people deconstructing. He said that he saw a study that someone had looked at this and said about 86% of people deconstructing stay in the church. So that's pretty good. Now someone say, well, what about that 14%? Yeah, well, sometimes that's the price of being honest with yourself and you know, that you can't stay in this. But as parents, when we have kids, if we're raising kids in the church, we want 100%. We don't want 14% of our children to go, I'm done. We like 100%. But you know, it's actually this deconstructing thing, taking your faith apart, disassembling the walls and seeing what's there. You know, most people work their way through it and they do reorient. They do come back. He said, you know, he found that people are leaving the church to find Jesus, which is a strange comment, right? They're leaving the church to find Jesus. We're supposed to go to the church to find Jesus, but they're leaving their context to figure out who Jesus is. What does he mean to them, if he exists at all? And he quotes a few people. He says he runs across over time. Deconstructors say things like, I have all the community and support I need with my close friends. So, you know, I'm not in a church context anymore because I have what I need. And so I'm not, my deconstruction was to dissociate from formal church. I cannot stand hypocrisy. Here's that so much from millennials, Gen Z, others, you know, that the hypocrisy of the church is a huge problem. We're trying to figure out where most of us know we're all hypocrites. And growing old is maturing is getting to the place where we're like, wow, I'm a hypocrite as well. But for those who are younger, it's always an issue to figure out, like, what's the hypocrisy going on in the church? Lived theology is what matters. And older generations, we're often so focused on theology and doctrine, sometimes we forget that it's how does that flesh itself out in real life? And next generations are really concerned about these things. They want to know what does this mean how you live? What's the manner of your life? Now we got well, we can go to what 5, 10 after before we run out of
5, 10.
Yeah, 10 o'clock, something like that. You can just, yeah. So a splintered generation, interesting. Another one of see, Trish recommended these 3 different podcasts. I listened to them all. Okay, I gotta help Trish out here. So one of the podcasts she listened to had talked about these guys who they were interviewed on the podcast. I said, well, I actually know these 2 from an article in Christianity Today from the spring called The Splintered Generation. These 2 pastors and researchers studying the evangelical church in America and saying, here's where we think the church is. This has been a fracturing in the evangelical community for quite a number of years now. And a lot of different reasons for that. Obviously, politics are part of that discussion. But it's a very interesting thing. What they came up with this, let's go to this next one. So they identified, they actually did a book on this where they identified 6 things they think the evangelical church has kind of moved into with people. And then when they finished their book, their publisher said, I think there's another one. So they added a 0, a different group. So rather than a group of 7, they added this new one for the publisher. And then this is his, I'm sure. He called them right-leaning ex-evangelicals, right? So I highlighted it so it's not the B, EB is EX. Ex-evangelicals have left the church, but identify as Christian or promote the merit of Christianity for the preservation of conservative cultural values and institutions. I think we probably see this in like politicians sometimes, where we see things that we're not sure who are some of these people, what they believe, but you know, are they really part of the Christian community? But It might be because they really like the cultural values of that, maybe, I think that might be what that is. But then, the authors, when they looked at this, they said they called one group the neo-fundamentalists, focused on biblical fidelity, conservative values. This group is deeply concerned about liberalism and growing cultural hostility toward Christianity. You know, and we all see that too, right? We see that nationally, maybe personally in some things, the neo-fundamentalists. That's one of the groups they mentioned. Now the next group, second group, mainstream evangelicals, got the ED in there, prioritize the Great Commission. So while they are concerned by extreme fundamentalism, they're more worried about the secular left's influence. You know, Great Commission, they're still doing evangelism, still doing outreach, but very worried about the secular left. Now, I'll talk about the third group first here. Neo-evangelicals emphasize the global nature of the movement and the need to engage with the culture. This group critiques conservative political allegiances and failures on social issues, while addressing liberal Christianity's theological compromises. So, of course, none of these are exact categories, right? I mean, these things flow together a little bit, right? People overlap. And I think it's interesting, you know, like in the church I go to, EFC, and my church, by the way, is Mandarin church, but we have English speaking congregation. And I've had a role in that for many years now. We're also, we've been kind of doing a partnership with Upper Marion Baptist, which is the building we use, but we're actually, every week, our Chinese English service is partnered with Upper Marion Baptist. And our pastor, Dan Au, is now they're calling him standing pastor. I never heard that phrase before, but it was a new one to me, but he's the standing pastor of both congregations. Upper Marion, very, trying to keep his nose above water for many years, kind of a congregation. And then the growing Chinese church do it well. But so my church is really mostly people in the two and a few in the ones. And the Upper Marion Baptist was really more of a 3 that's now become more of a 2. Now, interesting, my friend Trish, she said, by the way, in a text, she said, Mark and I see ourselves in number 3 here, but our church is definitely not a 3. And that's the source of her angst, is that they are thinking of things like the global nature of Christianity, you know, these are important things to them, engaging with the culture. What do you do with the gay community, for example, in the church, right? Things like that. And in every church, and I know Wayne's been through these things too, right? Every church has to do this, been through the same kind of thing. In fact, interesting trying to see where Wayne is basically on some of these, because I would think Wayne is not a 2, Wayne is a 3, maybe some of what the next one is, which is the 4. So 4, post-evangelical center on justice and accountability. They challenge hypocrisy and abuses in the church while distancing themselves from evangelical identity, though they hold to core doctrinal beliefs. Again, we probably think of specific churches or people we know that might fit into this. The justice issue be very, very big, and we see this certainly nationally. We see it in politics and Christians in politics. Where do people stand on these things? There's a lot of what these authors call fracturing, where it's hard for these different groups to be together. It used to be, they said, we could worship together, and now it's getting to where we can't. They've fractured where they see it very, almost impossible for these groups to come back together as it used to be. Very, very difficult, which is, you know, it's a sad thing right there. But then they have the group, the left-leaning ex-evangelicals have de-churched due to disenfranchisement with the evangelicals' failures, but retain some Orthodox Christian beliefs. And then the de-churched have left both the church and Christian faith entirely, abandoning vestiges of belief, all vestiges of belief. Does that make sense? Kind of interesting, isn't it? So they, you know, a good article just recently this spring in CT on this, and they've got a lot of thoughts in the article about what they think is going to happen, and which we'll probably talk about that more in the next couple of weeks too, a little bit about this. Yeah, go 2 more slides. I want to. Here's my daughter. So this picture's about 10 years old. So they're 2 of them now have each have 2 children. One of them still not married. And a lot of these things are really interesting to me, given my own family. Now, my daughters grew up, we were at Good Samaritan, it was a great, you guys know Good Samaritan well, it's a great church. And it was a great place, they all think very highly of growing up at the church, but, they aren't in that kind of a context anymore. Interesting to me now, when I look at my daughters, like my oldest is on the right, so she and her husband Evan, and her husband was actually one of my, an early advisee of mine, graduated from our program, so, you know, I knew him before they even had a relationship, they met on one of my class trips. So, that's her husband Evan, and they used to be very active at a church in our area, it's a Presbyterian church, it's a very conservative, evangelical, good church. And then I was shocked when they left it, and I was like, I thought you guys loved it there, they loved the pastor. And it was the position on homosexuality. That was anti, the gay community, and they left the church over there. I was kind of, a few years ago now, I was a little disarmed by that, but I'm like, okay, well, whatever. And they found a home at Overbrook Presbyterian. Which you guys know a little bit, because the pastor is Adam.
Right.
Heerling? Girls. So, I know he's at Wayne for a while, right? He was
Yeah, an interim here.
They think the world of Adam, both of them do. I've heard him preach a number of times. He's great. He's fabulous. It's a very progressive church. And states that way, you know, and that's what they've chosen as their home. So, we've been there a few times now, especially at holidays, and, I'm very impressed with Adam. Now my daughter Hillary told me the other day, because I had a chance to ask all three of my daughters and my sons-in-laws about these issues. It's okay, this Thursday has been a good occasion for me to bring this up, talk with my family about this a little bit. So, interesting that they've gone to the progressive church. Now my second daughter on the far left, she's, but by the way, my oldest daughter works at Penn, she's a research coordinator, gathers research for professors doing work on senior citizen issues. My daughter on the left, Alyssa, she's a VP at a marketing company in Center City, and hasn't been to church in years. And you know, it's very well so I'll tell you where they're on the scale in a minute. It's very interesting to me. But she still embraces certain things about the Christian faith, but there's other things not a part at all anymore about things. My middle daughter, Bryn, would be the most conservative of the group. Her husband, when he finished it he was a captain in the Marines. Then when he finished his service, and they eventually got their way back here a couple of years ago, and they now on the East Coast again from being placed in other spots. And they've been here 2 years and aren't in a church. And it's a shock to me. So I finally had a chance to ask them this week ago, with both of them, go, I'm not trying to be pressured, the father-in-law here going like, here, I need you to read this, and, you know, come back with, I just wanna know where you're at, and very interesting. You know, oldest daughter, basically theological issue, they wanted a progressive community, would not go to a church like we grew up at, they've been to our Chinese church a few times, they wouldn't choose that church, not because it's Chinese, because it's too conservative, theologically, not interested. Daughter on the left, oh, by the way, I would say that my daughter on the right, probably clear number 4 on that list. Clear number 4, right? So you have to go back and look at those again, I guess, to figure that out. But daughter on the left, I would call her a 5. She's basically left the evangelical church, but she still has some core beliefs. And interesting, she's single, but she has a boyfriend in Canada. She's been on vacation, and he's not Christian. He's had no background, a little Catholic background, I think. But she was just up there recently. His dad passed away. She was up for the funeral, and she said it was so interesting being at a funeral that had nothing Christian about it. There's no hope. And she said it was so interesting how different it was than my uncle's funeral a couple years ago, where everything was about hope and eternity, and we had a really interesting chat about there's so many things she kind of misses about the church, and she said she's interesting because she'll sound like an evangelical Christian, and then all of a sudden there'll be some Buddhist thing that comes in, right? Or some astrological something that I'm like, I'm scratching my belly. But she's a 5. Yeah, I want to be the dad going like, come on, wake up. Then the middle daughter, probably more of a 3. the issue for them is that, I said, so why not a church? And they go, it's so hard to try and find a church. Because you start visiting churches, then you gotta figure out what do they really believe about some things. And I said, well, like what kind of things? So Joe, my son-in-law, says, well, he said, for example, he said, you know, he's an Annapolis grad, economics. He said, I think socialism fits more the Christian idea than capitalism. He says, but I've been in churches where to say that, I'm over the line. And we've talked about like the guys in my background, they're all very capitalist, Christian capitalists, that's how it works. And both my sons-in-law are like, we don't get it. The socialism thing seems much more Christian to us. But it was the fact that Joe said, I know that if I bring that up, I want to make sure that I'm in a church that can embrace it. And I mentioned to my daughter, Bryn, I said, your best friend in life is the children's pastor at Good Samaritan. You know, so Kimberly's her best friend. And they still spend a lot of time together. And she goes, it's just too far to drive. So we got to find something closer to where we live by colleges, right? So all these things, but in my own family, trying to figure out where are people standing on these things? You know, what do you do? Very, very interesting where what this fracturing has meant. Now, we're out of time, so we didn't have to, and I didn't even have time to really discuss it, but we got 3 more weeks. What's that?
You leave us hanging.
Yeah, well, there's a little yeah. Hanging's good.
Next episode.
Next episode, yeah. So I want to get to the, you know, yeah, go down a couple more things, a couple more, one more. So, you know, I want to do go back, but we have to finish up the now next week a little bit. And partly interesting what my other son-in-law, the older daughter's husband, because he and I have we know each other really well, and he's an Eastern grad. A lot of interesting things about that, but this fracturing of evangelicalism, this deconstructing, you know, how do we figure out how to move forward? Really, that reorientation, a pretty great way to put that, right? So, how do we do that? You know, very fun this week to have conversations with all my kids and my two sons-in-laws about these things, right? To be able to go, we can talk about this stuff. As long as I say, I don't have an agenda here on this.
You just blame it on us.
Yeah. Yeah, still Thursday, guys, there's the agenda, I gotta figure it out. But it's, right, it's interesting trying to parse through all these things to figure out like, what does this really mean? And of course, I know as a church, Wayne Pres, dealing with all those fracturing issues, right? And certainly when certain moves, especially on social issues, happened a few years ago here, some big changes.
Yeah.
There's costs to that, there's benefits to that, and yet interesting hearing what you said about just being back at a church service, going, hey, there's some light here.
There's people.
There's some people, yeah. So you know, it's not like there's no people left because of all these changes. So we'll work through some more of those things together. But that's our intro to go. This is the now situation. This fracturing of the church and the deconstruction. Where does that all leave us personally when we're deconstructing? Are we just like people say, hey, just believe it because it's true? Or is it a context in Wayne Pres where you feel you can go, I can really ask those guys Thursday morning about what do they really think about this issue, because this bothers me.
You must have done something right as a parent. You're very fortunate that you can talk to your family.
To have those conversations.
Yeah, that'd be hard for me to do.
Yep.
You know, that's really something.
I'm kind of amazed that we can, and my wife and I talk about that often. Though I gotta tell you, I didn't think they'd be on the fractured church list where they're either, you know.
Yeah.
My middle daughter, who I would call the 5, is the one that was the most likely to go do in life what I did. Be a youth minister, she'd be a great youth minister. And she brings up once in a while. You know, it's like, wow, I know I've been so good at doing that. She didn't go that way at all. So I you know, there's things that are surprising about that, but it is helpful that we can have a conversation. But, you know, part of it, but honestly, it's taken me 2 years to ask my youngest, most conservative daughter, the Houghton graduate from, you know, conservative Christian college, be able to say, where are you guys at? It's taken me 2 years. So it's not even easy on that one, but and I'm glad that my middle daughter hasn't become antagonistic Because their antagonism for the evangelical church has gotten kind of pronounced. Like the middle daughter, she's like, part of it is that like, she loves the gay community, she's straight. But like one of the things she does, she plays, she's one of 2 women who plays on a gay men's kickball team in Philly. Like there's 15 gay guys on this team apparently, and these 2 women. And she says they're just the greatest group of guys. She's the best guys she's ever been around. But she knows in the evangelical context, no, over the line, right? So, they're interesting things, but we'll get to more of that stuff. But yeah, I feel good we at least talk. And in some ways, my wife brings up once in a while, she goes, you know, they're kind of doing what we did to our parents. Because I was the black sheep in my family because, oh my God, I went to a different seminary than my brothers. Wow, what a terrible rebel I was, you know? But it was a big jump, you know, I've talked about before in the past about my Pentecostal wife's background. This was a huge thing for my family, some defracturing of that, you know, of all that. So, anyway, lots to talk about, and we'll keep it going next week. But I know some need to probably go, but we'll keep chatting. You need to get up and leave, or
Some of us have to work.
work. Yeah, so feel free. We'll get to more.
So close with prayer or keep going?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'll pray. Thank you, Lord, again for these wonderful men who I've found so encouraging over the last, I don't know, 15 years or so now, to see their faithfulness and to get together, and their thoughtfulness, their integrity, their intelligence, their humility, their friendship, their ability to work through things together, knowing there's not always easy answers for everything. Thanks, Lord, for this group. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
One of the